Hey everyone, I'm Shaun Hagen, CEO of CartonCloud, and welcome to TWIL, aka This Week in Logistics. Each week, we break down what actually matters in logistics, not just the headlines and not just the hype. We talk about what happened, why it matters to you, and what you should actually do next. Last week, we talked about resilience in the face of physical supply chain disruptions, that being the escalation of the conflict in the Middle East. This week, that physical disruption has mutated into a financial one. We're dealing with the immediate whiplash of a massive volatile spike and subsequent drop in global oil prices. But it's not just fuel eating away at margins this week. We're also tracking a massive looming shift in North American trade policy and a new wave of warehouse robotics that proves the era of innovation for innovation's sake is officially dead. Today, we're talking about where margin gets squeezed, where risk is hiding in your network, and how the smartest operators are using the boring automation to fight back. But first, let's hit the recap, and here are the top stories that you need to know to start your week. First, ocean freight. After a quiet start to the year, we just saw container rates jump. The Drewry World Container Index rose 3% recently, driven heavily by increases on the Trans-Pacific trade routes. We're seeing a similar story up in Canada, where carriers are actively managing capacity to keep a floor on these rates, meaning cost pressure is absolutely still in the system. Next, network footprints. Amazon just opened new last-mile facilities in Lethbridge, Alberta, and Owen Sound, Ontario, utilizing a partner-led model to push one-day delivery deeper into rural markets. At the exact same time, FedEx's Network 2.0 consolidation is rolling on. They've already closed over 200 stations and expect to close another 475 by the end of 2027 to streamline their surface operations. Different companies, but the exact same service signal. Service networks are being aggressively redrawn around density and cost to serve. The US and Mexico have formally scheduled trade talks beginning March 16 ahead of the upcoming USMCA review. The agenda includes rules of origin, supply chain security, and regional competitiveness. This is a massive development for anyone involved in North American nearshoring, and we'll be diving deep into what this means for your operation in just a minute. On the tech front, NAPA Auto Parts is rolling out 100 warehouse robots at a new facility after a highly successful pilot last year. Meanwhile, Kroger is deploying autonomous inventory drones to scan pallet locations, specifically targeting their cold chain and freezer zones. And finally, before we move on to deeper dives, I want to introduce a new segment based on a listener suggestion, the Logistics Fun Fact of the Week, because yes, that's right, logistics can be fun too. With all the chaos in the global markets right now, it's easy to miss the quiet victories. And last week, both Canadian railways, CN and CPKC, announced they completely shattered their all-time historical records for February grain shipments. Combined, they moved roughly 4.9 million metric tons of grain out of Western Canada in a single month. To put that physical scale into perspective, that's enough wheat, barley, and canola to fill nearly 50,000 rail cars, all moving flawlessly through the dead of the Canadian winter. So amidst all the tech hype and geopolitical noise, let's take a second to appreciate the fact that sometimes the old school physical supply chain just puts its head down in the snow and quietly sets a world record. All right, so let's dig into the so what and get into our first deep dive. Let's start with the immediate threat to your P&L, volatility. Following the geopolitical crisis we discussed last week, we saw a massive, rapid spike in global oil prices. But here's where the whiplash happens. Literally yesterday, we saw those same prices drop sharply following an updated diplomatic statement regarding Iran that calmed some of the immediate market fears. Now, this extreme volatility is bleeding directly into domestic fuel prices globally. In Australia, terminal gate diesel pricing moved so erratically over the last few days that the Container Transport Alliance of Australia issued a direct warning to operators to review their fuel surcharges immediately. And we're seeing the enterprise impact too. Hormel Foods just announced that the tighter freight capacity and fuel costs directly hit their fiscal Q1 margins. Why the panic over fuel? Because in volatile market, rigid pricing will kill you in both directions. Think about how most mid-market transport companies run their fuel surcharges. They look at an average price of diesel over the last 30 days, calculate the new rate, and apply it to the next 30 days. And when diesel spikes by 40 cents in 4 days, a 30-day lag means you are subsidizing your customer's freight with your own balance sheet. You bleed cash on every load. But what happens when prices drop, like it did yesterday? If your surcharge stays artificially high for another 3 weeks, you might think you are pocketing extra margin, but that's probably not the case. Your customers' procurement teams are watching the same news you are, and if you aren't able to pass those savings down quickly, you instantly become the most expensive carrier in their guide. And in a competitive market, they won't even call to complain. They'll just quietly shift their volume to a broker or a competitor whose dynamic pricing already reflects the cheaper fuel. And the real question for operators this week is not, are fuel prices going to go up or down? The question is, how fast can your back office detect those cost movements and sync it to the invoice? If you're slow on the way up, you lose money. But likewise, if you're slow on the way down, you lose customers. And margin protection is about agility, and that lives entirely in your billing software and how frequently you revisit your pricing assumptions. Now, while the oil shock is an immediate hit, there's a second slower moving margin squeeze happening right now, driven by policy. Those US-Mexico talks scheduled for March 16, if you're an operator, trust me, I get it. Right now, it is very easy to tune out policy talks as background noise. I don't think you should do that here. Over the last few years, nearshoring trends have been the ultimate strategy, and there's been, as we all know, a big shift of volume to Mexico to avoid trans-Pacific risk. But that shift was built on a specific mathematical assumption about landed costs. And if the USMCA review tightens the rules of origin, meaning a high percentage of a product's components must be manufactured in North America to avoid tariffs, that math is either going to change or potentially blow up. And what does the cost of policy actually look like on the warehouse or operator floor? And it looks like friction. If security protocols tighten, it means longer dwell times at the border crossings in Laredo or El Paso. It means higher inventory carrying costs because your safety stock calculations have to increase to buffer against border delays. And if you're a 3PL managing cross-border freight, your customers will soon be knocking on your door asking for supply chain mapping. They will need to prove exactly where their subcomponents came from to satisfy customs. If your WMS or supply chain visibility tools can't track that level of granularity, your customers are going to be paying a heavy penalty. And the cost to serve the US-Mexico corridor is very likely about to change, and you need to be baking that risk into your long-term contracts right now. Finally, let's talk about the NAPA and Kroger announcements from our quick hits, because they represent the continued shift we're seeing in how the industry is buying technology, and something we've spoken about right back in the first episode about the shift from robotics to point solutions. For the last 5 years, robotics companies sold us a vision of the dark warehouse, fully automated, lights out, end-to-end transformation. And that's fantastic for the facilities that can afford it and have the workflows that match that type of solution. But in 2026, capital is expensive and patience is short, and the era of innovation for innovation's sake is dead. The most successful automation deployments today are what I call boring automation. Look at NAPA. They aren't rebuilding their entire supply chain. They are dropping in 100 robots to eliminate repetitive travel time for pickers. Look at Kroger. They're using inventory drones specifically for their freezers. And think about the freezer zone in a grocery DC. It can be a miserable place to work for long periods. Human errors skyrocket when operators are freezing, and staff turnover in cold storage is notoriously high. Kroger isn't using AI drones because they look cool in a brochure or they want to have a nice video to post on social media. They're using them because they're taking human cycle counters out of a sub-zero freezer, and that solves an immediate, painful labor constraint for them. And this is the new reality of logistics tech. It's no longer a sledgehammer, it's a scalpel. You don't automate the warehouse, you automate the constraint. If the ROI can't be proven in a spreadsheet in under 12 months by solving a highly specific point of friction, the CFO isn't signing the check. So let's tie all that together. Between the extreme fuel volatility, the looming cross-border policy shifts, and the new pragmatic approach to tech, the operators who will win in this environment are the ones who tighten up their execution. So your 3-part operator playbook for the week: shorten your surcharge windows. If you are running on a monthly fuel surcharge adjustment, move it to weekly immediately. Update your billing logic today. You need dynamic pricing to protect your cash flow when oil spikes and to protect your carrier status when oil drops. Number 2, map your cross-border exposure. If you operate in the US-Mexico corridor, get ahead of the USMCA talks. Audit your customers' HTS codes and component origins, and start having conversations about border dwell times and whether safety stock levels need to be adjusted for Q3. Number 3, automate the constraint. If you are looking at robotics, don't look for a dark warehouse. Look for the dumbest, harshest problem. Find the highest friction, most repetitive task you perform every day, like freezer counts or long walking paths, and automate that single constraint. Looking ahead to next week, my watch list is focused on the fuel pumps and opening tones of the USMCA talks on March 16th. I'm Shaun Hagen, and this has been another episode of TWIL. If this was useful, share it with your team, keep your pricing tight, and we'll see you next week.